The road into Dry Creek was nothing but a ribbon of dust, stretched thin under the dying light of the sun. The kind of road where you could hear your own heartbeat if you rode it long enough. And that afternoon, as the shadows lengthened and the desert heat began to loosen its grip, a lone rider appeared on the horizon. His horse was lean but steady, its ribs showing just enough to tell a story of long miles and harder days. Across the saddle there was a leather satchel, worn, creased, and buckled shut, and tied to the saddle horn was something that didn't belong to a man of God. A Colt .45 with the steel darkened from years of use. The rider wore black from hat to boots, but not the polished black of a city man. This was dust-stained black, sun-faded at the seams, the kind you wear when you've buried more than you've saved. He rode slow, his eyes fixed on the crooked row of buildings up ahead, where Dry Creek waited like a tired dog that didn't care much who came or went. When he reached the first building, a half-leaning feed store with a broken sign, a boy no older than 12 froze mid-step. Watching him, the man tipped his hat but said nothing. It wasn't the kind of silence you fill with words. It was the kind that told you he carried something heavier than the saddle on that horse. He hitched his mount outside the saloon, though his eyes lingered on the church at the far end of town. That church leaned slightly, like it was ashamed to stand, and its bell rope hung loose in the breeze. He stepped down, boots hitting the dirt with a thud, and pushed through the saloon doors. Inside, the air was stale, smoke, whiskey, and the faint smell of unwashed men. Conversations faltered when they saw him. Not because of his gun, though some men eyed it, but because of the Bible he set on the bar as if it belonged there. "Water," he told the barkeep. His voice was gravel, worn from dust and sermons. Alike. The barkeep frowned. "We sell whiskey here." The man met his gaze without blinking. "Then you'll be selling water today." Reluctantly, the glass came, clouded and lukewarm. The stranger drank half, set the rest aside, and turned to the room. "Name's Reverend Cole Whitaker," he said. "I'll be preaching on Sunday. All are welcome." There was a laugh from a table near the back, short, sharp, and ugly. A man with a scar down his jaw leaned back in his chair. "Preaching? In this town? Ain't much sin left to save, preacher." Whitaker studied him. For a moment, there was no sign of recognition in his face. But behind his eyes, there was something like memory. "I'll save what I can," the Reverend said, picking up his Bible and walking toward the door. He didn't go to the church. Instead, he rented a room above the general store, carrying his satchel upstairs without help. When the door shut, the sound of the lock turning was quiet but deliberate. Only then, under the dim light of a single oil lamp, did he open the satchel. Inside lay a leather-bound Bible, edges frayed from use, and a gun wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it slowly, the way a man might unwrap something sacred. The Colt was polished, cleaned, oiled. On the cylinder, faint but unmistakable, were 6 names carved by hand. The first name had a shallow line through it, a mark of completion. The other 5 waited, patient as tombstones. Whitaker ran a finger over the second name. His jaw tightened, and for a moment the mask of the preacher slipped, revealing something colder, sharper. Down in the street, the wind picked up, carrying the sound of the saloon's piano and the distant laughter of men who had no idea death was already in town. Whitaker blew out the lamp and sat in the dark, listening to the wood settle and the night grow. It had been years since Dry Creek last saw him. Years since the fire, the screaming, and the smoke that took his wife and boy. But the men responsible
By Friday,
were still
Reverend
breathing,
Cole Whitaker
and by
had
Sunday
already walked
that
the
was
length
going to
of
Dry
change.
Creek twice. He spoke little, but every step had purpose. Every face he passed, he measured, looking for the ones that still belonged to his past. He found the first name, on a slow afternoon in the saloon. Jonas Red, the man with the scar on his jaw. The same man who'd laughed when Cole introduced himself. Years ago, Jonas had been one of the riders who'd come through Whitaker's farm like locusts, leaving only ash and bodies behind. The Reverend remembered him not for his cruelty, but for the way he'd smiled while doing it. Jonas sat alone at a corner table, shuffling cards. Cole walked over, Bible in one hand, a calm smile on his face. "Mind if I join you?" the preacher asked. Jonas smirked. "Didn't take you for a gambler." "I'm not." Cole pulled out the empty chair. "But I am a listener." The two men spoke for less than 10 minutes. To anyone watching, it looked like a harmless conversation. But when Cole stood, Jonas leaned forward to pour himself another drink, and never got the chance to finish it. The Reverend was already halfway down the street when the glass slipped from Jonas's hand, shattering on the saloon floor. By the time the doctor arrived, Jonas was gone, dead, without a mark on him. "Poison," the barkeep muttered, but there was no proof, no witnesses, no trail. That night, in his rented room, Cole unwrapped the Colt again. He took a small knife from his boot and carved a deep, slow line through Jonas Red's name. 1 down, 5 to go. Outside, the wind carried whispers. Some folks said it was God's judgment. Others said it was just bad luck. But Cole Whitaker knew better. Luck had nothing to do with it. Only justice. And patience. By the second Sunday, the church pews were half full. Dry Creek wasn't a town used to sermons, but Reverend Cole Whitaker's voice had a way of drawing people in. He read from the book of Psalms, his tone steady, but between the verses. His eyes wandered to certain faces in the crowd, faces from another life. The next name was Eli Tanner, a man who now owned the livery stable. Years back, Eli had held Cole down while the others burned his home. Cole found him alone one evening, hammering a horseshoe into shape. "You've got a strong arm," Tanner, Cole said, stepping inside. Eli looked up, confused. "Do I know you?" "No," the Reverend replied. "But you knew my wife." There was no scream, no fight, just the sound of a single, muffled gunshot, buried under the clanging of metal and the wind outside. By morning, Eli was found slumped over his workbench. "Another accident," the town said. 2 days later, it was Mason Burke, the man who had lit the match that night, years ago. Mason was a drunk now, always by the river with a bottle in hand. Cole sat beside him at dusk, offering him a drink from his own flask. Mason took it without question. Minutes later, he slid sideways into the mud, eyes glassy, mouth still open. The sheriff was no fool. Sheriff Dane Hollister had been watching the pattern, 3 dead men in 2 weeks, all tied to old rumors about a massacre. And each time, the new preacher was never far from sight. That night, Hollister stopped Cole outside the church. "You got something to confess, Reverend?" the sheriff asked. Cole smiled faintly. "I confess every day, Sheriff, but some sins aren't mine." The wind shifted, and for a moment, they just stood there. 2 men who knew exactly where this was heading. Back in his room, Cole carved 2 more lines into the Colt's cylinder. 3 names left. One of them, Hollister. Sunday came heavy, the air thick with dust and the weight of unspoken things. The church was full, not because the town had found sudden faith, but because everyone knew the sheriff was there, sitting in the back, and the preacher's words had been circling him like vultures. Reverend Cole Whitaker stepped to the pulpit, Bible in one hand, his other resting lightly on the edge of the wood. He spoke slow, measured. "Some men believe death is the end. Others believe it's a door, but I believe death is a debt, and debts must be paid. The room was silent, except for the creak of the pews. Whitaker's eyes found Hollister's. This town's got blood in its soil, buried deep, but God, he don't forget. When the sermon ended, the sheriff rose, hand on his gun. Outside, the street cleared fast. 2 men walked into the open, dust swirling between them. "You've been busy," Reverend Hollister said, his voice steady. 3 dead men. All old names. 5, Cole corrected. By sunset, 6. The sheriff's jaw tightened. "You think killing me will bring M back?" "No," Whitaker said, "but it'll make sure you never take another." The clock in the general store struck noon. 2 gunshots cracked like thunder. When the dust settled, Sheriff Hollister lay still in the dirt, his badge catching the sun one last time. Cole stood over him, breathing slow. He knelt, took the Colt from his holster, and carved the final line across the last name. 6 names. 6 debts paid. The Bible stayed behind, placed carefully on the church's altar. Whitaker mounted his horse without looking back. By the time the sun dipped low, he was just another shadow on the horizon, a man with no more names to carve, but no peace to carry.